All right. All right. Hey, good morning. If I sound congested, it's because I am, but I am not contagious. I've just been battling a cold for about a week now. I think we're past the contagious spot, but we may not be. So some of you, I don't know, you might want to move. But anyway, no, I'm kidding. I think we're okay, but that's why I sound a little bit weird. Delighted to have you here with us. I'm just going to jump in here by asking you a question. Have you ever purchased something and then later asked yourself, why did I buy that? Like, what was I thinking at the time, you know? So a couple years ago, 24-Hour Fitness, the exercise place, they were running a special. And for $300, you got a full year's worth where you could, use 24-Hour Fitness. I thought, I should do that. That would be a good idea because it's good to exercise, you guys. I don't know if you've heard that. But anyway, somewhere I picked that up. And I thought, I'm going to do that. So I plunked down the money and said, I'm going to start working out. I used it twice over the course of that year. Some of you are doing the math. 300 divided by 2, not a great purchase there, but don't judge me. Some of you have a treadmill you never use. But anyway, I remember another time when I was a teenager. Some of you know I lived in Mexico, not with my parents, but kind of an exchange student. We had a relationship with another Mexican family, and anyway, but one time I remember going to Mazatlan, that was the town a couple hours from the town I lived in, and I bought a hammock because what is cooler than a hammock from Mazatlan? And it looked really nice, and they told me it was handmade, I think, or so I imagined. And I just imagined lying in that thing and enjoying my whatever favorite beverage, like a Coke or something, and just enjoying that. And so I bought it, I sprung for it. And as a kid, it's like, I don't have much money or whatever, but I got this thing and brought it home, eventually got home and realized I have nothing to connect this thing to. We have no trees, we have no, there's literally like nothing, right, in our backyard. And I also realized it was not going to hold me. This thing was cheaply made. And so I was like, I'll just hang it in my bedroom, for a decorative piece. And then I was like, that doesn't look good either. So I just threw it in the trash. And that's my hammock story. Some of you, you're laughing, but you have stuff like that, trinkets and things you've bought on vacation or out of town or whatever. Last year, I asked for Christmas for this like golf mat that you swing a golf club on, and it kind of like shows you sort of the trajectory of your swing and that sort of thing. Well, I misplaced it, after Christmas, and then eventually it popped up again. I haven't used that thing once, and we're almost a year later, and it's like, why did I ask for that? So have you ever had something in your life like that where you're like, you bought something, or maybe you got it impulsively, and the next day you woke up, it's like, what did I get myself into, What have I done? Well, today in this How to Be Happy series, we're going to connect some dots between our stuff and happiness, resources or possessions or finances and happiness. Now, just so you know, if you're new to the church, here's what we mean by happiness. We don't mean that shallow sort of fleeting feeling kind of happiness or just wearing a silly smile. Here's been our definition. It's true happiness. It's the state of knowing and experiencing real joy, real gladness and goodness and contentedness and blessedness and real purpose and real reward, which is neither produced or affected by fleeting circumstances, meaning the things that happen to us or the place that we are in life or whatever. True happiness is steadfast. True happiness it runs much deeper than that. And the reason why we're defining happiness this way is because as we've looked, and I don't have time to go through all of it, but as we've looked, actually the words asher in Hebrew in the Old Testament and makarios, the Greek word in New Testament, they actually are translated, depending on your Bible translation, in many different ways, but they essentially all mean the same thing, which is happy. That's really what it means. See, God is a joyful being. He is the happiest being in the universe. He's not silly. He's not goofy. He's not whatever. But he is content and satisfied and, glad and all these things, right? Heaven, will heaven be a happy place? As Christians, we believe it'll be full of joy and cheerfulness and gladness and satisfaction, right? It will be happy. So author and teacher, former pastor John Piper says, the Bible is indiscriminate in its uses of the language of happiness and joy and contentment and satisfaction. But for some reason, Christians over the years, especially the last 100 years, it used to not be this way, but have gotten kind of like queasy about using this term happiness when it comes to describing the Christian life, but we ought not to. Instead, we should just displace false or pseudo, kind of fake, phony happiness and pursue true happiness. Did you know that God is a happy God and that God wants you to be happy? He does. He wants you to be joyful, full of joy. He wants you to be glad. He wants you to be cheerful. He wants you to be content. He wants you to have a sense of purpose and calling in your life. All of these descriptions of happiness. And our desire and our prayer is that God would flood our hearts with the happiness that's rooted in Him. Well, I heard a story about a wealthy elderly gentleman who had married a beautiful young lady. There's a term for that, but I won't use it. But anyway, but he began to become concerned that she had married him only for his money. You know, I'm sure that's never happened before. But anyway, so one day he asked her, sweetie, just tell me the truth. You know, if I lost all of my money, would you still love me? And she said reassuringly, don't be silly. Of course I would love you, and I would miss you. Meaning I would love you, but we're not going to be together anymore. But anyway, so there you go. What is the connection? What is the correlation between money or stuff or possessions and happiness? What does the Bible say about that? That's what we're going to look at. Of the 29 parables that Jesus told, 16 of them deal with money and possessions and stuff. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, those three Gospels in particular, 1 out of every 6 verses has something to do with money. Randy Alcorn estimates that approximately at least 15% of Jesus' teachings have something to do with money and possessions and stewardship and generosity. More than, Jesus teaches about those kinds of things way more than heaven and hell combined. Some people say, he says 15%. Some people say it's closer to 25%, depending on how you're counting or whatever. Let me just remind you of some of the scriptures. Like, go, sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me, Jesus said. Jesus also said, those of you who do not give up everything, you cannot be my disciple. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for somebody who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. Another passage, Jesus is relaying the story and says, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be for whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. And on and on and on and on it goes. We'll do one more here. Jesus says, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. So all of us are to be rich. And we will either be rich toward ourselves or toward God. And that's the issue. There is a correlation between our stuff and our happiness, but it's not what the world tells us, because the world tells us that you need more to be happy. The reason why you're not happy is because you don't have more. And don't you see those people with more? They all seem to be happy. And if you had what they had, and even if they're not happy, well, if you had what they had, they would be happy. Because we all know the statistics, like if you win the lottery, you're highly likely to be like a miserable person in a few years or whatever it is, right? And we're like, well, I'd like to give that a shot, and just kind of see what, how it would work out for me or whatever. And there's something in us that our correlation is that I need more to be happy. Well, there is correlation between our money and our happiness, but it's not what we would think. And let me just say this disclaimer. This message may feel a little bit difficult to some of you, but it's not intended to be. It's intended to encourage, and it's intended to point us all to Jesus and finding. I'm teaching us this for our happiness, okay? I assure you. But let's face it, right now, costs are up, expenses are up, interest rates are up, a lot of things up, right? And some of you are in a spot right now where you're not sure how you are going to pay the bills. And by the way, if this is your church family, if there's a way we can help you in that, in some capacity, we would love to help, in some way. I just want you to know that. But some of you are in a really tough place right now, a difficult place. But I want you to know, as difficult as this message may feel specifically to you who are hurting in this area, I assure you, it is for your happiness. It's for your joy. So we're going to read this passage from the book of joy, the book of Philippians, chapter 4. We're going to start in verse 14. Going to make our way through 19, so not too many verses, and sprinkle in a few others as we go. But here we go. Let's start it off. Verse 14 says this: "Yet it was good," the Greek word kalos, or kind. It was good, it was noble, it was kind, it was beautiful in character is what that word means. "Of you to," he's writing to these believers in Philippi, "of you to share in my troubles." And this is fascinating because Paul spent about 3 years with these believers in Philippi, and he taught them and invested his life into them and encouraged them and led them to Jesus and and they formed a church, right? But now he is in a Roman prison. He's chained up to a guard, and he hasn't even seen these Christians in a good 10, 11 years. Like, it's been a full decade, but he's mindful of them, and when he thinks of them, I would imagine he smiles, because Philippians is largely about joy at its sort of center. And in verse 14 it says, "It was good of you to share in my troubles." To share, to have a partnership with, to have something in common with. And what do Christians all have in common with, other Christians or with each other? The answer is Jesus. We have Jesus. We have a lot of differences, and we could point all those out, but we have Christ in common, and he brings us together. He unites us. We have this partnership in knowing Christ, serving Christ, sharing Christ, suffering with Christ, partnership in the gospel. And he's writing these Philippians like, you came alongside of me even in my affliction, my difficulty, and my troubles. What an amazing bond we have with our brothers and sisters in Jesus. Verse 15, "Moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel," like when I first told you about Jesus, and who he is and what he did for you, right? 10 years ago, "when I set out from Macedonia." Okay, we got to remember that name, Macedonia. Will you say that with me on the count of three? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Macedonia. It's really important that we remember that, okay? And we'll get to that in just a moment. "When I set out from this region, this area," not Alameda, not Contra Costa, but Macedonia, "not one church shared or partnered with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you alone." And that is probably why they stood out to Paul in part. Like, you supported me, you were partners with me, even in my trials, my affliction. Verse 16, "For even when I was in Thessalonica," that's another city, "you sent me aid," support, more than once. Other translations read several times, or again and again, kind of this ongoing aid, ongoing financial support when I was in need. The partnership of giving and receiving is what he says. You shared with me. Receiving without giving is consumerism, right? It's just being a taker. It's being selfish. It's all about you and what you can get from others, what you can get from the government, what you can get from your parents or your friends or whoever, right? Your place of employment, your church or whatever. That's receiving without giving is consumerism, but giving without receiving, what is that? When you just give and give and give and give and you receive nothing in return. We might call that subjugation. Now, let me be clear here. I'm not talking about a relationship that's contractual, meaning I will do this for you and I expect you to do this for me. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a relationship where you're kind to somebody, you help somebody, you take them to the airport at 4:30 in the morning, you pray with them, you're a friend to them, you support them, you give them gifts or whatever, but they never give you anything in return. Now, I'm not saying you do those things so that they will do that. All I'm saying is the giving is one-sided. Are you guys with me? That doesn't describe a healthy relationship, because people give to those they love. We invest into what, where our treasure is, there our heart is. We'll get to that in just a moment. But we give to those we love. And so giving without receiving is this one-sided relationship. It's just like somebody's being used here, kind of thing. But there's this partnership. There's giving and receiving, and it's more than once. It's repeated. It's multiple times. All right, Macedonia. Remember that? Okay. Philippi was located in eastern Macedonia. So Macedonia is the region. Philippi is the particular city in that region. But eventually, Paul would leave Macedonia. He would go to Thessalonica. The Philippians would support him. Basically, they're supporting a church planter. This person, the Apostle Paul, is going to share the good news of Jesus, lead people to Christ, those who respond, right, and help them grow in the faith and establish kind of roots and spiritual roots and stuff. So the Philippians are helping fund a church plant is the concept here. And we get the sense that they're the only church doing that for the Apostle Paul. At least that's what he says. He's like, except you alone. Like, they are exceptional in this. Now, Macedonia. Paul writes another letter a couple letters actually, to some believers in another city called Corinth. Okay, Corinth. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, he refers to these believers in Macedonia, and that would include, guess who? The Philippians, okay? Are we tracking here? Okay, Philippi in Macedonia. So, okay, I just want us to, when we hear Macedonia, also hear the Philippians or the Philippi, right? Okay, 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Here's what he writes. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given, here they are, the Macedonian churches, meaning the Christians in where? Philippi, yes. Verse 2, in the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty. Wow, life is great. It welled up in rich generosity. Okay, let me get this straight. So we've got not just a trial, not just a severe trial, but a very severe trial, right? Plus extreme poverty equals what? Rich generosity. This is the equation that we're wrestling with here, right? Does anybody find anything odd about that math, right? Life is hard. I'm poor. Take everything else I have. Like, I want to give it to you kind of thing. Severe trial, extreme poverty, rich equals rich generosity. Well, actually it doesn't, because there's one part of the equation I left out, and it's in that text that we just read. And here's the real equation. They're going through something very difficult, severe trial, plus extreme poverty, plus what? Overflowing joy equals rich generosity. When you're going through something difficult and, money is scarce, that doesn't equal rich generosity. But when you're going through something really difficult and money is scarce, but your heart is filled with joy, that equals rich generosity. At least that's what we see in the believers in Philippi, right? Now, how does this happen? How can this be? Well, the only way it can happen, well, there's several things I guess I could say, but what I want to say is this. The one way it can't happen is if your God is money, then that equation will not work. But if your God is Jesus, and Jesus is the God who defeated death on the cross and paid for your sin, and then rose to newness of life and lives again victoriously, so that you, if you place your faith in him, can also live a triumphant, victorious life, then all of a sudden you can be generous. You see, a lot of us think that as Christians, our lives are to look, well, pretty much like the world's, except we go to church and stuff. But here we see something radical. We see people suffering, people being impoverished, and people overflowing in joy. And that produces rich generosity. These next two verses, I just want to read two more verses here in 2 Corinthians, are astounding to me. Look what he writes. For I testify that they, who's he talking about? Who's the they? The Philippians, the believers in Macedonia, that they gave as much as they were able, and get this, he's like, I don't even know how else to say it, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. Question. Does it sound like those Philippians going through a tough time who didn't have much money? Does it sound like they were manipulated and coerced to be generous toward the Apostle Paul and the redemptive mission of God? Answer? No. Their arm wasn't twisted. They didn't hear like a really sweet story, a testimony that just kind of tugged on the heartstrings. Carmen didn't get up and play a beautiful song, you know. They didn't have like, I don't know, some like, fundraiser, dinner or something like that. They weren't like manipulated, convinced, motivational speech, persuaded. No, what we see here is these believers are begging for the opportunity to be generous. That's literally the language. They urgently pleaded, the English Standard Version reads, they begged us. They weren't reluctant, they weren't hesitant. So, first big thought here. Having joy in Christ makes gospel partnership a true privilege. Not an obligation, not a duty, not, oh, you're going to really need to convince me here. No, it makes it a privilege, something that you don't have to do, you want to do. And here they are, they're begging for this opportunity to give. Why? Because they're full of joy. They're full of joy. And why are they full of joy? Because Christ Jesus had changed them from the inside out, right? This is one of the ways you know if you belong to the Lord. But Christ had changed them in a very significant, radical way, to use that maybe overused term, from the inside out. Okay, now back to our Philippians 4 passage. Okay, we got the connection there. Okay, verse 17. Not, Paul writes to them, not that I desire your gifts. Okay? What I desire is that more be credited to your account, which is fascinating. Paul's like, actually, I want, and God wants, your best. He has your best interests in mind. He wants something for you. I want something for you. So here's the second big idea here, is investing into God's mission, his church, his family, his saving plan is mutually beneficial. It blesses those who receive the gift as well as who else? The giver. The giver. The giver is blessed. So yes, needs are met. The hurting are given hope. The hungry are given food. The gospel is being preached. People are being taught. The sick are being given care, all these kinds of, if you need a coat, you give them a coat, if you need whatever, all this stuff. You're not expecting any kind of repayment, but you do get repayment. What I desire, Paul says, is that more be credited to your account. There is a reward. Jesus says it this way in Matthew 6. It's a familiar passage. Do not store up for who? For yourselves. Treasures on earth that are so fleeting, so temporary, can easily be stolen and ruined. Oh, we're going to see that. Where moths and vermin, I don't know who the translator was, but probably somebody from Tennessee or Kentucky, perhaps. Anyway, rats, I don't know, vermin, destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for who? Yourselves, you understand. Treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Wherever you put your money, that's what you love, right? Let me ask you some questions. Is Jesus saying it's bad to be materially wealthy? Is that what he says? No. Does he say, you know what, it's godly to only have cheap junk in your life? No. Some of you, have read it that way. I want to encourage you. No. Is he saying, having a lot of things means that you're greedy? Is that even what he's saying? No. He's talking about an investment plan. There's a way to invest on earth, and there was a way to invest in heaven. And both of them are for who? They ultimately are for yourself. And it's where you place the resources that you possess. Let me rephrase that. Where you place the resources that are God's, that you manage, that you steward. Because I know how this happens, right? We pass away, and then somebody goes through our stuff, and they find two things to keep. A picture and some jewelry or whatever, And all the other stuff, the furniture, the TV, that cool 27-inch console tube TV from 1984. And all the things, our VCR, and all the typewriter, all the stuff that we've acquired, they're just trying to get rid of it. And it's always a humbling experience when you take this stuff to Goodwill and they're like, no thanks. They're like, move along, You're like, well, where do I take it? Nobody wants my, I was going to say junk. Nobody wants my stuff. There's very little. So you can store it for yourselves here, but it's very temporary. Or you can store it for yourselves in heaven. But that means investing into God and his purposes, and his plan, and his mission, which is everlasting, which endures forever. And wherever your treasure is, there your heart is. That's what you love. And the truth is, some of us love fishing. So we love our fishing poles. And when we buy a fishing pole, we're not reluctantly doing it. We're like, I've got enough money to get my favorite fishing pole. I'm using that as an example. I'm not a fisherman. Is that even what we call it? Fishing rod. Okay, fishing rod. And I get my fishing rod or whatever, and I'm so excited because I've been saving up. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the truth is, you got it because you really enjoy it. You love it. And some of us, we cherish our caffeine, we cherish our kids' sports, we cherish our 12 streaming services, we cherish our clothes, we cherish our club memberships that we use twice in a year, we cherish how we smell, perfume, cologne, we cherish all those things, and some of us cherish all those things more than we cherish our God. Because we think that if I just have these things, they will make me happy. And I've noticed the happiness that comes with a new car. We've bought one new car in our whole lives. And I've noticed the happiness with that car goes away, well, one of two ways. The first scratch, right? Or when that new car smell dissipates, okay? Either one, and then it's gone, and it's like, okay, it just becomes transportation or whatever at this point. But that's the deceiving nature of stuff, and that's the temptation that the world throws at us, that you're not going to be happy until you have this. Will we hear a little bit about that on, I don't know, Thanksgiving week? What's that Friday called? Black Friday or Cyber Monday or whatever, all the names that they have? Absolutely. And as Christians, I'm not saying you shouldn't buy things, because we have an economy, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have nice things, but you should be wise, and you should beware. Okay, let's keep reading here. 2 more verses in Philippians 4, verse 18 now. Okay, so what I desire is more credited to your account, right? Okay, so I have received full payment and have more than enough. Like, I've got plenty. I'm amply supplied. I love that word enough, by the way. It's sufficient. It's enough. Now that I've received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. So Epaphroditus came from the church in Philippi, delivered him some gifts. They are a fragrant, what's the word? Offering, not donation. They're not a donation. They're an offering, you see. An acceptable, listen to the language, how this would sound to a Jew. An acceptable what? Sacrifice, pleasing to God. You see, typically people respond to a need and then they give. However, God calls us to something different. And if we miss this, we kind of miss the central point in being generous as Christians. Fragrant offering, acceptable sacrifice. This is the language of worship. Of worship. The word worship, it literally means to bow down, to surrender. And to a Jew, whenever they heard the word worship, you know what they would think? Sacrifice, offering. You and I, we hear worship, and what do we think? Singing. And it's wonderful to sing. I think more accurately that would be exalting God, lifting up the name of God. But worship is a different word. Worshiping is surrender and it is sacrifice. It is always surrender and it is sacrifice. It is surrender, it is sacrifice. It is declaring, God, you come first. God, you are above me. That's surrender. You are over me. And sacrifice, God, you are worthy, as Carmen often reminds us. He is worthy. Surrender and sacrifice. So point number 3 is this. The primary purpose of giving rightly is to worship God. So what am I saying? Let's just carry this out to its logical conclusion. The Christian who goes to church week after week after week and gives nothing to God, his purposes, his plan, his mission, is not worshiping God. They must have idols because everybody worships, but they're not worshiping God because we can't worship God. Worship means to surrender and to sacrifice, to give an offering. That is what it literally means. And that's the primary purpose of giving. And don't forget it. All right? Last verse here, verse 19. And my God, he finishes. So he's so personal, like the God I know, the God who's provided, the God who's performed miracles, the God with a master plan, the God I love and adore, right, will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. Here's the last big thought. Giving faithfully is a way that we discover whether or not we actually, remember that word from last week, actually, whether or not we actually trust God. See, in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus says this. This is how you should pray. He's like teaching his disciples. Not what you should pray, but how you should pray. And one of the things he says is, give us this day, anybody remember this? Our what? Our daily bread. Now, how often, when's the last time you prayed that prayer? Because I just go to Safeway. When I need bread, when I need food, I just go to, it's in my cupboard. Let's look at the date. Oh, it's one day. Okay, I need to go to Safeway and get a fresh loaf or whatever. And this is what we do. I'm rarely like, honestly, I don't think I'm in a posture of like trusting God to give me bread. And we have to be careful here because before long we become self-reliant and self-dependent and begin to deceive ourselves thinking like, I got it. Friends, one of the ways, not the only way, but one of the ways that you can actually know if you trust God is if you are a generous giver. You literally release and you're like, okay, Lord, now whatever you want to do. And Paul just said, you know what my God's going to do? He's going to provide for all your needs. He's going to take care of you. Don't look at your lack. Look at his abundance. God is trustworthy. God does provide. He doesn't give us everything we want, but he provides enough. And that's what Paul is encouraging them. He's like, I know you're giving out of your poverty and out of your affliction, but I just want you to know God's going to keep taking care of you. You know, it's interesting because there is a connection between generosity and giving and happiness. And Paul actually addresses that quite bluntly in another text in Acts chapter 20. I'm just going to read this one verse, Acts chapter 20, verse 35. And he's giving his farewell message to the church leaders in Ephesus, the Ephesian elders. Anyway, here's one of the things he says. In everything I, Paul, did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work, what kind of work? Hard work. We must help the weak, remembering the words of the Lord Jesus himself said. It is more blessed to what? To give than to receive. Any guesses what that Greek word blessed actually is? Because I do have a Greek New Testament. It's makarios. In other words, you're happier if you give than if you get. And don't we experience that? I mean, once you're a little bit mature, past childhood, and and it's Christmas time, are you more excited about the gifts you're about to receive as a 38-year-old career person or mom or dad, whatever? Or are you more excited about the gifts you've given to your spouse, you've given to your kids? It actually is better. It's happier to give than to receive. It just takes a little bit of maturity. That's it. And to know Christ and to understand that he is the greatest giver and we will never surpass his generosity toward us. It is more blessed to give than to receive. This is why every Christmas you ask your grandparents, maybe you have grandparents that love Jesus and hey, what do you want, Grandma? What do you want, grandfather or whatever? And your grandma says, I want some hand lotion, because it's what you get them every year. And that's what I got my Nana every year, hand lotion. She has so much hand lotion. And because it's just easy. And your grandfather's like, oh, get me a tie or whatever, a shirt or something like that, And are they saying that because they're like, man, I just really needed a tie. I need some hand lotion so bad. I cannot wait for Christmas to open up that gift. Hand lotion. No, it's literally just the first thing they can think about. It's they're literally saying, I don't care, but I want to give you the opportunity of experiencing the joy of giving. But every grandparent loves Whether it's a gift card or a gift that's wrapped or whatever, they love giving gifts and watching the people they love open them up if they have like an ounce of maturity. Jesus is actually not trying to like trick us. It's the truth. It's better, it's happier, it's more blessed to give than to receive. Question. Joel, I get it, but how do we do that? Because I'm teaching this under the assumption that every devoted follower of Jesus actually wants to be a generous person and actually wants to be able to give. And we're like, man, it would be so great to win the lottery so I could just like give, you know? It'd be so great if I had this because then I could just give. If I just earn like 10% more, then I could give. And then we earn 10% more. And sometimes we don't give. But I'm operating under the assumption that we want to be generous toward God. I'll say it. What I mean by that is his purposes, okay? So here's I'm going to map out this plan for you. Ready? Number one, esteem doing excellent work. You guys, work is good. Did you know that God called Adam to work in the garden before the fall? Remember that? The fall just made work hard. You know, right? The sweat and thorns, and it's going to be difficult now, right? But before the fall, he said, Adam, you got work to do. You got to tend this garden. You got to take care of it and stuff. You see, God created us to be productive, did he not? Like, we want to be doing things as long as we health. I promise you, those who lack health, they wish they could go outside and pressure wash. You guys, I love pressure washing. When I'm 80 years old, I'm going to start a pressure washing business. I'm going to go door to door in my little pressure washer. Can I pressure wash? No, get out of here. I'm still pressure washing. You know, I mean, I love doing that, right? And don't you love being productive and seeing work accomplished and seeing this sense of like, because God made us to be productive. You guys, work is good. Not all of you love your jobs, but you know what? You're providing for your family. And you're providing in ways to meet the needs of others. And you're providing maybe a service for the community or the nation or the world or whatever you're doing. Work is good. And I want you to know that. And I also want Christians, let's esteem doing excellent work. What do I mean by that? Let's do our best. Let's not be lazy. Let's show up on time. Let's get stuff done. Let's be irreplaceable at our place of employment. Now, part of the reason I'm saying this is like, if you're that kind of employer or employee, is your employer going to want to fire you? No, they're going to want to keep you around. And guess what that often means? Now, not all the times, and I get every career is different or whatever, disclaimer, but you get the point. A lot of employers then would love, you know, at the right time or whatever, give you a promotion, give you a salary raise, give you more time off, whatever it is, because they value the good and excellent work you do. And I think that should mark Christians, actually. I think we don't need to be like the smartest or the most talented or whatever, but we ought to be people who give our best. And even Carmen, like with the worship team up here, he's like, dude, you guys got to know your parts. You got to practice during the week. You got to show. This isn't like, all right, it's American Idol time and just wing it, you know, and this is going to be good. No. There's sacrifice involved in worship. There's effort put into it. And it's good. All right, enough of that. All right, that's a whole nother message. But esteem doing excellent work. Number 2, establish lifestyle and spending boundaries. Boundaries. What's a boundary? It's a limit. It's a limit. Essentially what I'm saying is figure out where your enough is. Determine where your enough. I know this is not how the world operates, okay? But this ought to be how Christians operate. It should be clear that even though we could drive that or we could live there or we could do this or that, we choose not to. We could stay at the 5-star resort, but you know what? I'm going to slum it at the 4-star instead. And I would say, fine, that's great, right? But just establish your enough. You know what that's called? It's called contentment. Paul writes, godliness with contentment is great. Does anybody know how it ends? Is great gain. Godliness with contentment. Are you content? Until you are content, you will never be a generous person. You will always see others as people to use, people to take from, people to give you an opportunity, to make your life better, right? See, it's all about, your heart. Establish what is enough. I have friends of mine, very, very wealthy. They've never lived in a gated community. You would never know, really, by their lifestyle that they have as much wealth as they do. They give tremendous amounts of resource to God and His kingdom and His purposes, and they're not doing it begrudgingly. They love it. They really enjoy this privilege. Most people aren't wired like that, you guys. And you don't need to be wealthy to have that mindset. You just say, you know what? This is enough. This last week I was spending time I got to see my parents, but also got to see my son and his family. And he's got a little bit less than a year of chiropractic school left. And his wife is working full-time. My son also works part-time. Nonetheless, life is busy. They have a granddaughter. It's full, right? And they live in this elderly lady's daylight basement situation, and it's low ceilings and stuff, but it works great for them, and the price is right, You guys remember that early in your marriage? Maybe you had that kind of situation, right? And I told them, you guys, understand something. I've had plenty of people tell me later in life, after they could afford the big home and the fancy cars and the awesome trips, they look back and they cherish those early years of marriage. When they didn't have much, they had to trust the Lord. They had to be faithful with what they had and just live. And I will tell you, my son and his family, they're happy as can be. And they're not going to be happier to have, I'm not saying they shouldn't own their own home or whatever, but I'm just saying that mindset is really, really important and it's good. You've got to establish you're enough. Otherwise, life has a way of, I just need more, I need more. Oh, Lord, I'd love to give, but I can't now. I have nothing to give. Of course, a boundary could also be establishing a budget, but who does that? Anyway. No, let me just say this, because this happens, right? You're driving down the road, you see a new store, you got some spare time, you're like, I wonder what's in that store. Let me tell you what's in that store. Satan is in that store. You don't need to stop at the store, all right? Just keep driving. You don't need to, come up with things to purchase. You ever gone to Costco, you want to get 6 things, and you come out with, 2 carts full of stuff? I don't know what happened, right? Because all of it looks so important and necessary, and it's going to make life easier and better and all this stuff. Satan is there, okay? Create a budget, boundaries, limitations. You will never be generous until you have these things, ever. And frankly, you'll learn the hard way. You'll take trips, and you'll get back, and you're like, it would have been just as fun just to stay home. We've all been there, right? Number 3 is this. Eliminate wasteful spending. Wasteful. Fix the metaphorical leaky water faucet, right? Sometimes it's not a metaphor, it's actual. Joy and I want to seal up the gaps in our windows and doors and stuff, and just better insulation, and because we get our energy bill, our gas and electric bill, and oh man, it's nice here in the Bay Area, but it's steep, right? And what I've learned the hard way is that a lot of cracks and leaks and all stuff. That what we have a great HVAC system and all that, but it's never enough to cool the entire outside. You know what I mean? California's not getting cooler. I'm like, I can feel it right here. It's coming out you ever had this happen? You're like, but then it just disappears. Anyway, so I'm learning this, and I'm like, that's just a waste of energy. But you know what else it is? A waste of resource. So it's just not being wasteful, right? All of us have, purchased maybe a car that kept breaking it down and we didn't mean it to, or an appliance that kept breaking. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a club membership that you don't use. Do you know how many people have golf memberships and they just don't golf? They literally, because I used to work at a country club when I was a kid, and we would literally see some golfers twice a year. these extravagant golf, uh, places or whatever. So, yeah, streaming services, right? I'm just throwing, okay, I know you're making us uncomfortable, right? But I mean, we got Netflix and Amazon and Apple and Disney and Hulu and YouTube, and then you got Paramount, and it's like endless, right? Most of the stuff you don't even watch. Be thoughtful. You guys, it's wasteful. You ever bought clothes and you never wore them? I have clothes because when I lost all that weight, I was like, oh, this will look nice. And then I put the weight on fast. I'm like, well, can't wear that anymore or whatever. But I did, or shoes or things like that. Just be cautious of, anybody have a gift card right now unused at their house? Right now. Am I the only one? Okay, anyway, all right. I thought there was more than me. But anyway, so yes. Somebody mentioned this earlier to me. And they said this. Sorry, you guys. I'm going to land the plane here in a moment. But we're not going to end with a song. Carmen already said it's okay. I said, Carmen, I got too many jokes. But anyway, no. Somebody mentioned, and I'm not really in this world, but video gamers. There's some video games, and there's like these in-game purchases, right? And so you can get the outfit for your ninja person or the skin, or you can get these. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Anybody? Okay, thank you. All right, somebody. And you can buy, and it literally has no redeeming value. Like there's nothing, it's like literally just take my money, take whatever. And it's to feed your addiction to play the game. Okay, am I saying all of that is horrible? Like, listen, you've just got to learn to be wise, but I am saying this because some of you haven't learned to be generous, and frankly, part of the reason is you haven't learned to be disciplined. And you've said yes too many times, and you've wasted too much. See, I'm operating under the assumption that every Christian wants to be generous. We don't want to get through there are people, they live life, they go to church, they die, and they give very little. I'm like, you've literally lived an entire life with very marginal, if any, true worship to the living God that you claim to love. Because you always had a reason for it. And so I want to prepare you for that day. Paying 18% interest on credit card debt. Okay, we could go on and on and on. But there's all kinds of ways that we waste, okay? Last thing I want to mention here is execute a prioritized plan. And the key word there is prioritize. Because a lot of people use their resources like this. They spend, and then if they have any money left over, they save. And then if they really have any left over, then they give, right? And I get it. That's the way the world works. You guys, that is humanistic, if you think about it. Because spending, who's that for? Me and my family. Saving, who's that for? Future me and future my family, right? And then give others and God's purposes. The Christian life is not ordered that way. A financially responsible and properly ordered fiscal life for a Christian is ordered this way. Giving comes first. In the Old Testament, this is called first fruits. Have you heard of that term before? It's the first portion of your crop. Crop comes in. I'm going to give this first fruit to the Lord. I'm going to trust God with the rest. But giving always comes first. You know what? Let me tell you something about God. It's very clear throughout the scriptures. He doesn't need your stuff. He doesn't need your money. And he certainly wants nothing to do with your leftovers. He doesn't want you getting in the back of the fridge and there's that mac and cheese that's been in there for 3 weeks. Jesus, thanks for coming over. You surprised me. I've got a meal for you. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Put it on the plate. Let me heat it up for you a little bit. Thank you, King Jesus. He doesn't want it. Read Malachi. The Old Testament scriptures are very clear. If we give unto the Lord, we give first. And I would encourage you too in this is to give a percentage. You say how much. You need to figure that out with you and God. I'm just saying never give God your leftovers. The sequence matters to God because God comes first, because he is first, because you worship no other gods but him, because he will not share his glory with another. Should I go on? You get the point. Okay. He must come first. Now, percentage give. So ever since I will just tell you guys, 13 years of my life I was a youth pastor. The most I ever made was $55,000. And most of those years, there's no retirement. There's none of that kind of stuff. It's just that's what we made, and very grateful for it, and was able to live and support family and kids and all those kinds of things. We always at least tithed. Always. And you're like, but was that in the Bay Area? A few years of it, about 4 years, it was. In this cheap little town called Danville. And we got very familiar with brands like Kirkland and Signature. And, it's like we can't afford the fancy Kraft mac and cheese, But I'm just telling you guys, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. I'm just trying to communicate a model. We're in this with you. Now, you might not be able to tithe. I get some of you are on fixed income or your retirement year, whatever, all kinds of reasons. You've got to figure that out, but I'm certain about this. When it comes to the way you use your money, God must come first. Otherwise, keep it. Keep it. I don't know who gives what at this church. Some of you are like, whew, I can look Joel in the eye now. But frankly, it's kind of a bummer because it's maybe a discouragement to those of you who are incredibly generous to this church. I went long. There's two kind of action steps here. I want you to, one, begin to pray. We're going to give you an opportunity in 3 weeks. Just begin to pray about, and I get if you're married, you've got to talk it with your spouse, whatever. But begin to pray about the possibility of sponsoring a child from Rwanda. A child who sleeps in the dirt, a child who has nothing. One set of clothes. We think we have poor people. The poor people here have cell phones, you guys. The poor people here are, let's face it, they're overweight most of the time. The poor people here are like, I've been to truly impoverished places, and many of you have too. People living on trash heaps and stuff. There's opportunity for God's people to care for the poor. But through this ministry that we love, they also share Christ with these kids as well, and they grow up in environments where they can grow in character and godliness and all kinds of things. So anyway, we'll tell you more about that, but just begin. That's 3 weeks from now. Really don't want you to miss that week, but begin about praying about sponsoring a child. Last thing, got to land this plane. Will you consider helping us as a church finish 2024 really strong financially? Now, if you're at a place where you're like, I'm not sure I trust you, Joel, or I trust the leadership, and I'm new, and I'm whatever, it's like, dude, I get it. I mean, I would look at me and I go, I don't know about that guy, but I would say this, fine. I would say fine. If it's not Cedar Grove, then find somewhere else that shares Christ, teaches the Bible, teaches the gospel, equips kids and seniors and everybody in between, and put your investment there. So there's no pressure to give here. But for those of you who do love our church and believe in what God's doing in this imperfect church, will you help us finish strong financially? And here's why. A couple things. Number one, Cedar Grove is coming up on its, I think, 80th year of ministry, which to me is really exciting, which means that all those people who made sacrifices for decades, they're all long gone, and we're sitting in a place because they cared. Flat out. And I think that's cool, and I want to do the same for future generations. We cannot live this consumeristic lifestyle where it's always about the immediate and it's always about us. Just be faithful to God and what he's doing in this world. Does that make sense? Okay? The other thing I want to say is there's a few things we'd love to do, and here's what's cool. because of your generosity, which thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, and because of our trying to be good stewards, I think we should meet budget by like maybe the first Sunday in December. Meaning the rest of December, all of that, I would love for that to go to a few things if we can do it. One, I want to renovate the middle school and high school area upstairs. I want it to be great. You guys, it's not easy being a Christian today for youth in this world. They need a safe place, a place with peers who will encourage them, mentors, and we want to make sure that they know that they're valued by us, okay? So we want to do that. New carpet, paint, lights, make just a great space for them to gather and have fun and worship God and grow in faith. Secondly, we've got some work to do in the kids' playground area. I mean, if you've ever been back there, they've got like one of those like rocking horse things on a spring, like from some McDonald's playground circa 1962. I'm looking for the Hamburglar. I don't even know what's going on back there. But anyway, we want to like create a nicer, it's not a big space, but what we have, we want to make it nice. But then here's the big one. This is expensive. You guys, we need to repave our parking lot. And it stinks having to say that because that's not an exciting pitch, right? Are you guys pumped about a parking lot? But frankly, it's in awful shape. You know it. I know it. Everybody knows it. The city just did the roads. It's like, okay, we get the message. And but not only is it an eyesore, frankly, it's a hazard. And we have people trip out there and people that have difficulty walking, and there's spots that are not even. It's just not great, okay? And I'm sensitive to that in part because of my neuropathy. So walkings can be a little tricky for me, all right? So, but I want to present this property like this church is filled with people who care about their church. And, hey, here's the good news. We won't have to do it again, okay? The next generation, they get to do it again, all right? But the parking lot that was put in the 60s or whenever, it is probably 20 years overdue, and it's time. And we've gotten like 6 bids for it, and we've tried to, figure out how we can save and this and that, but it just needs to be done. Are you guys with me? Okay, I love you. I've gone too long. Let me pray. Father, thank you so much for your goodness, your love. I believe, because you say, I believe that happy people give and that giving people are happy. Lord, whether we can give much or little, like the widows might you be pleased in our offering our sacrifice to you? Might it come from a spirit of cheerfulness because you love a cheerful giver? May we be faithful. In Jesus' name. Everyone said? Amen. All right, you guys, you are dismissed. I so apologize for going so late.